it's other witnesses who come forward and their testimony matches the evidence that they have, the prosecutor has a tough decision to make. One is to say, I'm not going to file charges. And as you remember, Megan, this prosecutor, there was a big challenge to him being appointed because his father was killed by an African-American male. Right. A lot of members of the community said, he's not going to be fair, he's not going to be fair. So I'm totally speculating here, let me say that. But if I'm the prosecutor and the evidence that's presented to me shows me that it's not consistent with what was said in the media, but it's more consistent with the officer's version, in order to avoid the appearance that I am just tubing the case, I might impanel a grand jury and say, I'm going to show you everything, not just the witnesses that if I wanted to, take this guy to the mat, I would show you, but the witnesses that he probably would present, and put everything on the table and let them make a decision. That's the only thing that comes to mind. Other than that, I would expect the prosecutor to fight forcefully for the indictment he seeks.
Judge Alex, stand by. I want to bring in Fox News legal analyst Arthur Aidala, who has tried cases on both ends of the criminal spectrum as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney. What your thoughts on that, Arthur? How unusual it is that this prosecutor did not go in and argue for manslaughter, for murder, but just presented the jury with sort of the panoply, the grand jurors, the panoply of charges that they might consider.
Well, Megan, in the state of New York, the prosecutor's not allowed to make a closing argument. They're only allowed to what's called marshal the evidence. So you're allowed, especially in a presentation like this that took a very long time, at the end you're allowed to say, here's the evidence that you've heard, as I recall it, when it's your recollection that controls, and then you tell them what the evidence is, then you recite the different laws. If you find by a preponderance of the evidence that on this date, at this time, he did commit the act of involuntary manslaughter, you can return an indictment count of involuntary manslaughter in the first degree.
And then how do they vote on that? Then he sends them, I mean, how does the procedure work where they sit amongst themselves and decide?
Well, quite frankly, I don't know exactly, only because I've never been a grand jury. That everyone leaves the room. There's no stenographer, there's no court officer, there's no prosecutor. It's just the citizens who have been chosen on that grand jury who sit there, and there is a foreperson, just like in a regular grand jury, who's just supposed to keep a count, and then they decide amongst themselves, and they have to be at least 9 people.
Just stand by. I want to tell the viewers we just got the 2-minute warning, so we will be getting the verdict within the next 2 minutes. The media is present in the courtroom. The prosecutor will come in, and we expect him to make the announcement one way or the other. As you can see, massive crowds now gathering outside of the Ferguson, Missouri courthouse, and we are just getting news in that there are already protests emerging in various cities around the country. The one highlighted here is Chicago. We will get video of that for you. We have been told by police departments in other cities that they have been placed on alert as well prior to this verdict, preparing for protests, perhaps. No one knowing for sure what the result is, but preparing for the worst, hoping it for the best, as they say. Arthur, so that it has to be 9 of the 12 who agree. Will we find out what the breakdown was?
I don't think you should. You will, and I don't think you should. As you said accurately earlier, it is a misdemeanor for the grand jurors to speak. Now, if you want to be very realistic, Megan, a misdemeanor, the punishment is up to a year in prison. If some agency, news agency, is offering someone $500,000 to tell their story, well, somebody might decide, you know what, I'll roll the dice, and the judge isn't going to put me in jail, and I'll take $500,000 to tell my story. But one last thing, Megan, is there is an option in certain jurisdictions. If there is not a true will, a grand jury can issue a rule, and the grand jurors themselves can tell the story on paper and say, this is what we found, this is what we heard, these were the witnesses, this is what they told us, and this is why we did not return a true
But what
will.
about the prosecutor? He's going to take 20 minutes of questions. Is he going to tell us what he understands the rationale to be? What is he at liberty to tell us?
He's at liberty to tell you, well, it's just 2 different things. If there's a true will, if there's not a true will.
If there's not one, what can he say?
He can tell you the witnesses that he put before the jury, as long as he's confident that he's not compromising anybody's safety. And what you're reporting on right now about all these people out there who are protesting, if I'm the prosecutor, I am going to be very hesitant before I put anyone's name out there. I may say there was a witness who was standing 25 feet away, and this witness said X. And there was a witness who was 20 feet away, and they said Y. But I am going to make sure I do not put anybody's life at jeopardy in this type of a heated confrontation that's taking place in the streets.
Stand by, Arthur, as the prosecutor, Bob McCullough, is coming into the courtroom now. Let's watch and listen.
Good evening. Thanks for your patience. I'm late getting up here, so I have a statement at the very beginning here, and then we'll be happy to answer some questions when we're finished with that. First and foremost, I'd like to again extend my deepest sympathies to the family of Michael Brown. said in the past, I know that regardless of the circumstances here, they lost a loved one to violence. And I know that the pain that accompanies such a loss knows no bounds. On August 9th, Michael Brown was shot and killed by police officer Darren Wilson. Within minutes, various accounts of the incident began appearing on social media, accounts filled with speculation and little, if any, solid, accurate information. Almost immediately, neighbors began gathering and anger began growing because of the various descriptions of what had happened and because of the underlying tension between the police department and a significant part of the neighborhood. The St. Louis County Police conducted an extensive investigation at the crime scene, at times under very trying circumstances, interrupted at least once by random gunfire. Beginning that day and continuing for the next 3 months, along with the agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation at the direction of Attorney General Eric Holder, located numerous individuals and gathered additional evidence and information. Fully aware of the unfounded but growing concern in some parts of our community that the investigation and review of this tragic death might not be full and fair, I decided immediately that all of the physical evidence gathered, all people claiming to have witnessed any part or all of the shooting, and all other related matters would be presented to the grand jury. The grand jury of 12 members of this community, selected by a judge in May of this year, long before the shooting occurred. I would like to briefly expand upon the unprecedented cooperation between the local and the federal authorities. When Attorney General Holder first announced the federal investigation just days after the shooting, he pledged that federal investigators would be working with local authorities as closely as possible at every step of the way and would follow the facts wherever they may take us. As General Holder and I both pledged, our separate investigations follow that trail of facts with no preconceived notion of where that journey would take us. Our only goal was that our investigation would be thorough and complete to give the grand jury, the Department of Justice, and ultimately the public all available evidence to make an informed decision. All evidence obtained by federal authorities was immediately shared with St. Louis County investigators. Likewise, all evidence gathered by St. Louis County Police was immediately shared with the federal investigators. Additionally, the Department of Justice conducted its own examination of all the physical evidence and performed its own autopsy. Another autopsy was performed at the request of the Brown family, and all of this information was also shared. Just as importantly, all testimony before the St. Louis County Grand Jury was immediately provided to the Department of Justice.